So forgive me for jumping into such a lukewarm topic. There was a lot more fervor in the discussion around this when I first conceived of this video and wrote up the script. But since it takes me a while to produce these, the team at Second Dinner has since announced their plans for moving cards between series in the game Marvel Snap. And if most of that last sentence was gibberish to you, sit tight, I'll explain more about it later in the video. But I thought this was a good opportunity to trick you into learning about a good technique for evaluating different design choices as you go about making your game. Hi, I'm Mike, and today I want to talk to you about an issue that was brought to my attention, at least, by the YouTubers KM Best, Regis Kilbin, and TLSG, and that's related to the cost of trying to stay current with all of the card releases in Marvel Snap, and in particular, what it takes to have the best deck. And I'm not anywhere close to having a full collection, nor am I close to reaching the highest levels of ladder, but I do have some thoughts about why this is maybe an issue with the game design, like the underlying game design of Marvel Snap. Now, that's not to say the cost itself isn't a problem, but I do think there's a deeper underlying cause of the problem that needs to be addressed, or at least considered, when we talk about trying to solve this problem in the long term. But before I can really get into that, there's a technique that I need to explain so I can further elaborate on my point that I think is important for you to know, and that is the idea of a persona. So, what is a persona? A persona is a person that you make up, basically, to represent someone in your target audience. It's important to note that this is not trying to be the average person in your target audience, because there really is no such thing as an average person. A good example of this is back in the 1950s, I think it was the US Air Force having trouble designing cockpits for their pilots because they were using the average measurements of all of their pilots to form the basis of what they were designing. And it turns out, when one of the scientists decided to see how many of the pilots actually fit within that range, or within that average that they created, turns out that none of them were even close. So when they thought they had been designing their cockpits for all of the pilots, it turns out that they had been designing their cockpits for none of the pilots. And yes, those were physical measurements in that example, but I think the same thing applies to just design in general, in that if you try to design a game that is fun for everybody, you're more than likely going to design something that's not fun for anybody. So it's important to be kind of specific when you are designing these personas, because you are trying to design fun for a small group of people and not everyone. So a couple of quick tips about creating personas before I jumped into talking about Marvel Snap more directly. Number one, you definitely want to give them a name. It makes it much easier to refer to them in your design discussions. And it also kind of makes it easier to think of them as, oh, what if this real person was to live with these design decisions, how would it affect? And the second thing is, you don't want to get too detailed into their backstory. You kind of want to just fill it out just enough so you have something to work with, but no more than that, because you don't want to get bogged down in kind of the details. So if I were to, say, create a persona for Marvel Snap, let's be clear here, I have no insider information about this. I don't know how they make their design decisions. This is just speculation based off of what I know of design and what I see in the game and what I've seen from interviews given by Ben Brode. But if I were to try to, I guess, reverse engineer a persona for Marvel Snap, it would probably end up being something like this. We'll call him Brody. We'll say Brody is a father of two, has a stable job, modest job, so he has limited time, but has enough funds that he's not worried about paying the bills every month. So he has a little bit of a disposable income to be able to afford to various hobbies. He has some nostalgia for card games, collectible card games like Magic the Gathering or the Pokemon card game, where he would be able to only get a pack a month and then have to make decks based on what he has. So he could talk with friends in Theorycraft in a time before the internet was around to just tell him what the best deck was. So if we were to now think about the kind of experience that Brody would like, probably something that is quick to play, something that has enough tactical depth that he could, again, talk about it with his friends, and something that limits the amount of cards that you get so he could really savor each new one that he opens up and is able to play around and build several decks with it before the next one shows up. And in those kind of criteria, that's kind of what we get from Marvel Snap. Now, the problem here for Marvel Snap is that if we continue to only design the game based on Brody, we're going to start losing the interest of players like Katie. Katie is a competitively minded card game player. She has enough free time in between her college classes that she's able to dedicate to playing the game, so she will be able to reach high enough on the ladder given enough time, but also doesn't have a huge amount of disposable income to just keep buying cards. Now for Katie, the collectible aspect of this game isn't as important to her because all she wants to do is brew strong and or fun decks that can get her to the top of the ladder. Or if we look at Todd, we'll say Todd is a very casual game player and only really has time to play games on his commute between his 2 jobs. So he's not able to really dedicate the time and energy investments required to really come up with a whole bunch of new decks. So he relies on content creators to test out and create these new decks that he can just play for a couple of games a day while he's traveling between jobs. Unfortunately, just given the design of Marvel Snap right now, it doesn't really cater to players like Katie or players like Todd. But these are kind of the players that have been attracted to the game. Now this is kind of a unique problem for Marvel Snap. This is not something that you'll probably run into in your own designs or your own games, just because of a couple of things really. I think it's the pedigree of the developers of Second Dinner, having created Hearthstone, that reputation preceding them and attracting a lot of their previous audience from that game as well as the fact that Marvel is just a very popular thing at the moment, and so there's going to be a wider amount of interest and eyes on this game because it's a Marvel property, or it uses Marvel properties, I should say. Usually when games start to attract people from outside of their target audience, it's because the developers have opted to do that purposely. Like they've started to design systems in place to start trying to attract that wider audience. And so a lot of the pain and friction points that players like Katie and Todd are experiencing in the game now would be either ironed out or well on their way to being ironed out because the game is just more mature at that point. But because of the overnight success as really of Marvel Snap, those systems just aren't there because the game isn't quite mature enough yet for that. Let's take a small tangent to explain what the problem is going on in Marvel Snap. So Marvel Snap, there are several different collection series that you go through to collect cards. And so you start with Series 1. You can only collect Series 1 cards until you've collected all of them. Moves on to Series 2, same thing. But once you've collected all of Series 2 cards, you move on to Series 3. But in Series 3, you can collect cards from Series 3, 4, or 5. This is a lot of cards at this point. And to try and make this process easier and smoother for players so that they can choose the cards that they want every once in a while, the developers have added a currency called collector's tokens. The cost of a card in collector's tokens is based on what series they are found in. So Series 3 cards are 1,000, Series 4 cards are 3,000, and Series 5 cards are 6,000 tokens. If you are playing the game regularly, you can expect to get 1,000 tokens in a month if you are still missing cards from Series 3, or 6,000 tokens a month if you have all of the cards from Series 3. However, they're also adding 1 new card a week, generally into Series 5 cards. The problem is that it's nearly impossible to keep up with the release schedule with the current rate of collector token acquisition. So I think that their recent announcement of moving cards down from Series 5 to Series 4 and Series 4 to Series 3 is a good step to alleviate a little bit of that pain point for players like Katie and Todd. However, I don't think it's really addressing the underlying issue in that the whole collection system is designed for a player like Brody. So I do have some suggestions that I think might help to alleviate some of these problems for these players like Katie and players like Todd, that I'm sure Second Dinner will come up with similar or even better solutions because they are very, very clever when it comes to design. But off the top of my head, the things that I've come up with are: 1, they can include some monthly rotations of free cards, or when a new card is released or somewhere along that time, having a featured card for 24 hours or 48 hours, like their hot locations, where that card is free for all players, along with maybe 1 or 2 supporting cards, so that everyone has a chance to try and build decks with it. And I think this would have the benefit of letting players really experience these cards themselves, so they'd have a chance to make a more informed purchasing decision for the collector's tokens. And 2, it would make the release of new cards exciting for everyone because they wouldn't be locked behind this paywall, at least not for these 24 to 48 hours. The second potential solution is with the release of their new friendly battle mode, have an option in there that enables you to use all of the cards that are currently released within the game, not just limited to your collection. I think this would have the added benefit of being able to create better tournament practice so that you don't have to rely on people just having the cards. Now, not being a part of the team at Second Dinner, I don't actually know how feasible any of this is. I just think that these are two possible solutions for how to alleviate some of these design constraints or designs that were made for players like Brody and make it more accessible to players like Katie and Todd. Back to the idea of personas. If you do ever find yourself in a situation like this, where your persona doesn't match who your player base or audience actually is, I think it's important to not necessarily discard your previous personas, but it's definitely important to start to add personas that you're designing for that are more closely aligned to the player base that you currently have. Because decisions made for Brody aren't always good for players like Katie or players like Todd. Hopefully I've been able to give you a good understanding of what personas are and how to use them to evaluate design decisions in your projects. If this has been helpful to you, it would be great if you could hit the like button. I'm told that it helps to get this video out to a wider audience. And if you're interested in seeing more thoughts on different games from me, I have a playlist somewhere around here. And that's it for me for now, so take care of yourselves and good luck with your games. I'll see you next time.